we get started. There's some seats up here. Today we'll be hearing, for now we'll be hearing from Richard Sebastian. He's the Director of Teaching and Learning Technologies at the VCCS, Virginia Community College. And we'll turn the time over to him. Thank you. I will explain the video, but how many of you have seen that before? Good. How many of you have seen that video before? Oh, no. Puddles pity party. So today I'm going to talk a little bit. I have a cast of characters I'm going to talk about regarding the VCCS that I want to introduce you to. The first is Achieve 2015, our 6-year plan. Something called Rethink, which is part of that, which is re-engineering the way all of our colleges kind of do business, how they look at things. ELO, textbook costs and digital learning resources work group, which I'm part of. Our faculty, the Chancellor's annual retreat. The Chancellor himself, let me get a better picture. Yes, Glenn was our Chancellor for the Virginia Community College system. Blackboard Learn, New River Community College, some great ideas. Northern Virginia Community College, Tidewater Community College, Otis from Andy Griffith, and then again Puddles the Clown, Puddles Pity Party. So let me talk a little bit about kind of the framework before I talk about our OER projects at VCCS. The framework really by which we operate under is called Achieve 2015. It's our 6-year plan. And the really 3 important parts of that are increasing access for students across Virginia, making college more affordable for students in Virginia, and increasing student success. So a lot of the stuff that we've been doing, like redesigning developmental ed, are oriented towards those goals. And there's some other goals too that are less related to the academic side of things. Just a little bit about VCCS. We have 23 community colleges across the state. There's our kind of enrollment count. It's probably like most community colleges across the nation is starting to go down after a very significant increase in enrollment. And we have these things called the Golden Crescent. The Golden Crescent was really responsible for Terry McAuliffe's win yesterday, the governorship. And there's these urban populations along the East Coast. So our Northern Virginia Community College is there, a very large urban college, Tidewater, J. Sargent Reynolds, which is in Richmond. Then we have the rural horseshoe, which is the colleges in the kind of our rural part of the state are very different. The economies are very different, the populations are different, the level of education. So it's really a large state. If you go out here, you're about kind of the same band as Detroit. So it's a large state and with a really varying population. We have about 80 fully online degree programs across our state. 1 in 6 of our students take all of their courses online. And what I've been thinking about, I was at the keynote today when George Siemens, I think he mentioned some Catholic retreat he went on. And I'm a Buddhist, and I was thinking about something called Indra's Net, which is, if you've heard anything about Buddhism, everything is connected, right? The world, you, kind of all woven together. And in my job and with OER, I found that to be true too, which I'm going to talk about today. So first I'll bring up Puddles the Clown, who was the singer of that video. So I came across that video on Facebook. A friend posted it, and I was fascinated by it. I watched it over and over again. And he's 7 feet tall, which is one thing. He's got a beautiful voice, right? And so finally I talked to my friend who had posted it, and I said, this is great, and he said, we know who that is, right? I said, no. And so I'm from Richmond, Virginia, that's where I live. And you may have heard of OER. It's a famous band from Richmond, Virginia. They dress up like space aliens from the Antarctic and spew lots of bodily fluids at their shows. We also have a band called Useless Playboys. You might see a bald guy there in the back, who is Mike Geith, Big Mike Geith. It was Puddles, right? Which is interesting, it's from Richmond, right? And I said, well, that's great. I've been in bands too. I've been in bands since I was in my 20s, and my friend said, well, you know what? You sang with him. We were in a band together for one day, one practice. I don't remember it at all. So I actually not only know this guy, but I sang with him. And Also, Johnny Checo is also in the Useless Play Boys. I took my son, who's 3, to see Touch a Truck. Didn't get to sit in bulldozers and things like that. And I heard someone playing Sir Mix-a-Lot, and a bunch of 4-year-olds dancing to Baby Got Back. And it was Johnny Checo. Another coincidence, but kind of related to this. So in 2004, the top secret report was released by the VCCS called the report, the Task Force on College Textbooks. Right? And there was a number of findings, 12 different findings or recommendations that came out as part of this. It wasn't really top secret, just no one knew about it. I've been working by that time for a year with a group of faculty and staff at the VCCS to reduce textbook costs, to look at textbook affordability before we even found this. So I'm assuming not much was done with it, but it tells you that at least within our system, the textbook affordability has been an issue for quite some time. So a lot of the recommendations look very familiar to me from what we found. But when I first started, when I first started at Virginia Community College about 2.5 years ago, I started doing some presentations on open ed resources. I was kind of learning myself. I just started to develop an interest in this, and when I came from outside the community college system to start talking about this, I did some presentations. And I met with some faculty at New River Community College, known to be an innovative, kind of middle-sized college. And the faculty were really sick of assigning these textbooks to their students because they didn't really need them. They wanted to just assign web resources. So I met with them, and they were pretty much doing their own thing, right? And they did. They went and they developed some open or free resources for their students. They really weren't interested in the whole Creative Commons open licensing and sharing. They just wanted to reduce costs for their students. But they kind of kicked the ball rolling as far as a college making some kind of effort to address textbook costs for their students. Then as part of the rethink or reengineering that we're doing at the VCCS, there's kind of 3 relevant groups that are relevant to this conversation. The one is the Textbook Cost Digital Learning Resources Committee that I was on, which is looking at textbook affordability. Another, which is the ALO, I said ELO, it was a joke. Articulate learning outcomes. So all of our course outcomes are aligned across all of our colleges. They're very, very broad, and not many people really even know what they are. They don't really look at them. And so it's an effort to kind of look at those again and redevelop them and make them a little bit more, tighten them up, basically. And then there's the Chancellor's Advisory Committee that was involved in kind of our faculty evaluations. How do we change kind of faculty roles and evaluations related to the Affordable Care Act and other things as well. I'll get back to this in a minute. So first, with this committee that I was on, we were looking at a number of issues around textbook affordability. We formed around May 2012 with a pretty broad charge. At that time, if you look at this blue half over here, this is kind of our faculty's awareness or use of open ed resources is really non-existent. A lot of people, were kind of dabbling in it, but most of our faculty didn't even know. When I went and presented at colleges, they didn't really know what I was talking about, and that's sort of a really steep learning curve. So part of what we were charged to do is basically what's adding to the cost of textbooks in our system. How can we use digital learning technologies to reduce those costs, or including open ed resources? How do we look at our libraries as a source of reducing textbook costs? How do we incentivize faculty members? And then maybe more difficult charges are to what are the relevance of textbooks really in our are they really something that we should still focus on? And how do we change the institutional culture around kind of openness, sharing, which wasn't really a practice, a really widespread practice, and still isn't at most of our colleges. In August, we had something called the Chancellor's Planning Retreat. This is all coming together. Our Chancellor has a retreat every year that's thematic, and he really releases kind of some bold ideas and things he wants to do. In 2012, he wanted to strand on OER. So I organized a panel, included David Wiley, Nicole Antlin, who was also there, Jim Broom, you know him, and so we put together this great panel, and in the audience were some folks from Tidewater Community College. You may have seen their presentation. I think, Kim, did you already present their stuff? If you haven't, you should. And Tidewater, one of the VPs was there, and David said something about there was no one was really working, or no one had developed a degree program that was all OER degree program. And the light bulb went off in his head, and they started working on what eventually became known as their Z courses. So that was in August. About that fall, I managed something called the Chancellor Innovation Fund, which gives out money to innovative projects. And one of those projects that applied got $20,000 from Northern Virginia Community College to develop some a gen ed certificate using OER. Preston is here, and have you presented yet? Friday. See him on Friday. So they started working on that. So all this stuff snowballs, kind of getting larger and larger. And we got that money in November for a goal of finishing it at the end of June of 2013. And then in spring, the chancellor wanted to basically incentivize faculty at our colleges, like how can we get faculty to create and use open ed resources in their courses. So we put together an incentive fund. We got $3,000 to faculty. The emphasis was on adoption and not creation. The reason for that was, I've been talking to David Wiley, and a lot of the foundations were really, there was a lot of people sharing lots of work, uploading their content, but there was less and less adoption of other content. So we were kind of at this exponentially increasing amount of content, but little adoption. So we wanted to focus on that. We were focusing on high enrollment courses to get some basically scalability and have even a modest scaling of that should basically have kind of a significant impact. I wanted to make it cohort-based, just to give a kind of extra level of support to these folks. They were from all different colleges across our system. And then we got Lumen to support. That was another big factor that I think a lot of folks, at least at this time, were really thinking about, like, here's your money, go develop your courses, but really, they really needed some guidance. And we kind of advertised it as a textbook swap. Just swap out your cost textbook for your free stuff, right? But it really was still course redesign, which they, in the end, the faculty members really actually liked. Again, everything's connected. So we released our interim report of this work group. And again, we had a really expansive charge in September. And again, because of my role in the system as someone who's kind of helping support colleges with technology initiatives, distance learning, things like that, I'm involved in some policy talks and things like that. So I try to have at least a kind of a bird's eye view of what's going on. So two of the things that came out of our recommendations, I think were important. One got back to the faculty evaluations that were being worked on through, again, this reengineering effort, which is to include something in there for our faculty, not to require them to adopt OER. That's not going to work, right? But just language saying they need to bear in mind when they're choosing resources these considerations. And all we did was add reduced student costs. We added the word student, right? That's the baby step we're going to take with that. But again, it's an opportunity for introducing this kind of the direction that we're going in the system to as they're developing these new evaluations. Another thing we did was suggest, this hasn't been adopted yet, but I'm hopeful, is that it's kind of a if you think of carrots and sticks, it's kind of a stick made of a carrot, right? So presidential evaluations are going to include a metric for the college. The president of that college will have a metric for reducing textbook costs at their college. So it gives them some flexibility to figure out what's the best way, what's going to work on their college. It doesn't mandate it from a kind of a system level, but it does. There's that expectation that's going to happen. And so those were two important things that came out of this. Also, while this group was meeting, Northern Virginia was in their negotiations for bookstore contracts. And I don't know if you're from, who's from a community college here? A number of you. So the way it works with us, we have proprietary for many of our campus proprietary bookstores, Barnes and Noble, Follett, others. And our bookstore contracts are pretty lengthy, typically about 10-year contracts, so 5 years with 5 renewals. And that's a long time, right? And Northern Virginia was just entering into their negotiations. And because one of Preston was on our committee, he was able to kind of insinuate himself into these discussions and get some language in there into their contract that give more flexibility around OER and things like that, which was another thing that, a very timely thing that came out of our discussions was there's 9 other bookstore contracts that are up for negotiation right now. So we were able to kind of strike while their iron's hot while that stuff was happening, even as we were just getting into these issues. So again, because of this kind of bird's eye view, because of kind of these interchangeable parts, that was really advantageous. So for the Articulate Learning Outcomes, basically the first course that this group had finished was Psychology 200. That wasn't necessarily a highest enrolled course, but there was a lot of folks had difficulty with it. And so they redesigned the learning outcomes. And what we did is our work group, this textbook cost work group, worked with that work group to develop something called LibGuides, right? So we took the learning objectives that they had developed, and some of our library staff used something called LibGuides, where they mapped the learning outcomes with some of our library resources. Now we have a statewide group called Viva. So 4 years and 2 years, they kind of share resources and they buy things in bulk for the most advantageous rates. And so we have, a technical term is a buttload of resources that are underused, I think, quite a bit. And so what they did is put together just a list of resources that are all concurrent use. They're not necessarily open, some are, but for our students at least, you could use them anytime, anywhere for any course. And you could actually build a course just using library resources. So that's another really advantageous kind of synchronicity thing that happened while we were working on this issue and then kind of aligning with some of the other reengineering efforts. All right, you're good. And then we had these 3 other projects. Tidewater. I'm not going to talk about Tidewater in Northern Virginia. I'll let them talk about that at length. But and then our Chancellor's OER adoption grant, all hitting around the fall of 2013, kind of piloting these courses. So with the Chancellor's OER adoption grant, these are the 12 courses high enrollment courses that were developed with faculty, and we had about 520 students enroll just for the pilot in the fall, about 20 sections, and so 12 different colleges, piloting each of these courses. And depending on the savings, the metric that Nicole Allen and Spark are using, $100 per student, so that's about $52,000. But we also calculated up to $92,000, depending on the cost of the textbooks and whether to buy a brand new textbook, et cetera. So the savings were significant for just a kind of a minor, small effort. Again, it cost $36,000 to fund it. So we already kind of recouped that money in student savings. And then Tidewater had developed what they're calling Z courses, an entire associate's degree of courses that they created. So a student can go through Tidewater's courses and get an associate degree in business administration. No textbook. And then Northern Virginia, again, they've developed a Gen Ed certificate with all open ed resources and are applying, I believe, for finishing that for Gen Ed degree. So they'll have Gen Ed degree that's going to be all OER their students can go through. So again, all this stuff happens somewhat happenstance, somewhat coordinated in some ways. It probably needed to be a little bit more coordinated because, as you can see, we've got a lot of English 111, 112 courses that are being developed. And then newer for community college developed OTIS, which is their Open Text Initiative system, because they, again, they do their own thing in many ways. That's their culture there, and so they, we develop all these resources. How are we going to share them at our college? So they developed a kind of in-house repository So that got us thinking, the other three colleges thinking, well, the other two colleges thinking, we're creating all these materials, where do we put them? Because Blackboard Learn just wasn't working, right? If you have Blackboard Learn as an LMS, it's really difficult even. Now we have a centralized Blackboard Learn that we host. Once there are 23 colleges, so we all share the same LMS. Even then, it's tough to, how do you create a course, and how do you create these materials and share them? And so immediately, the thing that many of us hadn't thought about is like, well, what do we do? How do we share these things? People were finding out about these pilots and saying, well, I want that course, I want that SDV 100 course, how do I get it? So that has led to another project that I get to do, which is our needs assessment, right? So we're looking at, is Blackboard Learn really meeting our needs? What LMS wouldn't meet our needs if it's not? Or is there any LMS? What are our LMS needs system-wide? We've had Blackboard Learn for about over 10 years. And so that's a current project that's just getting underway. And again, the VP from Tidewater who developed these e-courses is going to be chairing that. And then just last week, I got to go in to meet with the CFAX, which is a faculty advisory committee, right, over our intellectual property policy. There was a lot of I'll try to be fair to faculty, but there was some concern over the policy because it was written in 2002, and distance learning courses back then took a lot of development expenses, and so they were all in the policy. They were all not property of, but they all could be used by the VCCS, right? So you use a lot of resources to develop this. We're going to keep it, but everything else in the policy was really meant to allow the most freedom compared to what the policy could have been. But there was some concern, even faculty saying, if this is true, I'm not going to put my courses in Blackboard. I said, well, okay, that's great. And then a faculty member stood up and told us about his videos that he created for his class. Now, in his house, he painted a wall green for a green screen, and he uses Adobe Premiere, where he creates this background and creates videos for his students that he either uploads to YouTube and puts on a Creative Commons license and puts on YouTube. And so it was really interesting to see faculty very concerned about really courses that I don't know if anybody would be interested in your Blackboard, lists and things like that. And he stands up and says, I go to a lot of effort to put these courses together, and they really are fun and funny, and you can have them. And so he was, because he kind of really changed the tone in the room from this entrenched faculty kind of against the system to saying, why don't you just put an open license on and just be done with it, make it easier. And that's something that our intellectual property policy does not reflect, and is currently another project that we're working on, which is how do we revisit this very old policy to include some open language around open licensing. So some takeaways at the end of this. So where we are now, I don't know. We're in the middle of like a lot of projects, a lot of things happening. There's a lot of reaction to it, but the tough nut to crack, I think, is institutional faculty culture. Just getting the word out, changing kind of the angle, kind of like that faculty member did at the meeting of the faculty committee. Libraries. Something that really hadn't occurred to me, but these folks, the folks in libraries, are really the experts at this, and they're really excited about it. And Ray, are you? Yes. Libraries.
Librarians back here. Thank
All right.
you.
And they're here for libraries. And also, look for connections, because I think all this, it's not just a matter of swapping out free stuff for paid material. You're really changing. This is a OER is really kind of a stealth activity that help transform kind of fundamentally teaching and learning. It's hard to get away from it. It's hard to step into this, as I found, and not start to ripple out into really looking at what we do and how we do it and better ways to use these technologies to incorporate these digital skills for our students. Thanks.